On the 17th of December 1944, in the bone-chilling dawn at the village of Honsfeld, Belgium, the engine of a Tiger tank roared weakly, sputtered, and fell silent like a mighty beast brought low. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the sharp clang of metal ringing through the thick fog, blending with the frozen breath hanging in the frigid air. His driver, Unteroffizier Weber, twisted the ignition again, desperate to revive the 700-horsepower Maybach engine. But only silence answered back. The fuel gauge needle pointed stubbornly to empty, a silent verdict. From the lower compartment, Obersturmführer Hans Gruber shouted up, his voice trembling with barely controlled panic. "The reserve tank is dry too." Peiper climbed down from his command tank, his leather boots crunching on the frozen Belgian soil with a dry, crackling sound. Around him, the most formidable armoured spearhead the Wehrmacht had ever assembled for Operation Wacht am Rhein. The desperate Ardennes offensive lay motionless, like giant steel statues. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all paralyzed by empty fuel tanks, as if the war had paused mid-breath. Through the swirling mist, Peiper glimpsed the abandoned American position ahead Honsfeld, a critical supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled in such haste that flames still flickered in oil drums, coffee steamed hot in metal cups, and there, lined up like a gift from the god of war, stood rows upon rows of jerry cans, thousands of them, those distinctive olive-drab American fuel containers gleaming faintly. Peiper approached slowly, each step deliberate, almost reverent, his heart pounding in his chest. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruber, pried open a can and took a deep breath. High-octane gasoline. His men dove into the frantic task of refueling, like thirsty travelers finding an oasis in the desert. Peiper walked among the stacks, counting each row, and the numbers hit him like a tidal wave. 50,000 gallons, enough to propel his entire Kampfgruppe to the Meuse River, enough to shift the course of this audacious assault. The Americans had left behind more fuel in this single depot than most German divisions had received in the past 6 months, a treasure any commander would dream of. But as he stood amid this bounty, watching his soldiers pour American gasoline into German tanks, a heavy realization settled over him like the thick fog enveloping the field. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, if they could leave behind what Germany would defend with entire divisions, then this war was already over. Germany hadn't just miscalculated, it had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of its enemy. That sinking feeling didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of a fuel crisis that had been strangling the Third Reich for months. 6 months before Peiper's fateful discovery at Honsfeld, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, presented the Führer with a report that should have halted all offensive plans immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically obliterated by relentless Allied bombing campaigns. The Leuna works, which had churned out a robust 175,000 tons of fuel in April, was reduced to a pitiful 5,000 tons by September. The hydrogenation plants at Politz, Bleckhammer, and Bruges operated at less than 10% capacity, like aging machines on the brink of collapse. Those numbers told a story of inevitable defeat, etched in black and white. In 1944, the United States alone produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil, while Germany, even with synthetic output and captured Romanian fields, scraped together just 33 million barrels, less than 2% of America's flood. The Third Reich was attempting to wage mechanized warfare with horse-drawn logistics, a throwback to medieval times, while America was drowning its armies in a sea of petroleum abundance. Major Friedrich Zimmermann of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require at least 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, but due to bombed-out rail lines and the overwhelming dominance of Allied air forces, only half ever reached the front. The German High Command was betting everything on capturing enemy supplies, a strategy born not of strength, but of terminal desperation. Meanwhile, the Americans had crafted a fuel supply network that seemed almost miraculous in its efficiency. They built the Pluto system pipeline under the ocean, stretching across the English Channel, to pump 1 million gallons daily from Britain to the continent. And then there was the Red Ball Express, a colossal convoy of 6,000 trucks roaring non-stop, delivering 12,500 tons of supplies to the front lines every single day, like a steel river flowing through liberated France. Imagine those convoys, headlights cutting through the night, wheels rolling over rutted roads, carrying fuel and hope, each truck burning 40 gallons daily, a figure Germany could only dream of. By December 1944, US forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons per day, but receiving 1.4 million fighting while building reserves, a level of excess that defied belief. Peiper was no fool. At 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, a seasoned veteran of the Eastern Front, where fuel shortages had turned battles into grim tests of survival. His Kampfgruppe had been designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive thrust of the entire Ardennes offensive. On December 14, 2 days before the campaign began, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was blunt. "You'll have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." Peiper's allocation? A meager 31,000 gallons, barely enough for 50 miles of combat. The distance to the Meuse? 65 miles. The math of failure was baked into the plan from the start. As his column prepared to advance on December 16, Peiper issued strict orders. Tanks would move in single file to conserve every drop, engines off for any halt longer than 5 minutes, and capturing American fuel dumps was priority one, above even tactical objectives. The contrast with American operations couldn't have been starker. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion, stationed just 20 miles from Peiper's starting point, recorded in his unit diary, "Received fuel resupply of 8,000 gallons, third delivery this week, storage tanks already at capacity." On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 a.m., the German artillery barrage that opened Operation Wacht am Rhein unleashed a thunderous rain of shells, expending more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war. But even this awe-inspiring display couldn't mask the deep cracks beneath severe shortages eating away at the core. Peiper's column began moving at 7 a.m., already behind schedule. The roads, marked as highways on German maps, turned out to be narrow country lanes, many unpaved and slick with snow and mud. Within hours, crippling traffic jams erupted as vehicles designed for the vast Russian steppes struggled through the dense Ardennes forest. At Lanzerath, the first objective, they encountered unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, just 18 men who held up the mightiest German armoured column for nearly 10 hours. During that agonizing delay, Peiper's vehicles idled, burning precious fuel like water through a sieve. When they finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn on December 17, the column had covered 20 miles and consumed 40% of their fuel. At this rate, they would run dry long before the halfway point to the Meuse. The American supply depot at Honsfeld wasn't even a primary facility. It was a forward supply point for the 99th Infantry Division, classified by the U.S. Army as a Class 3B depot, a temporary fuel station. Yet what Peiper uncovered there surpassed the monthly fuel allocation for an entire German panzer division. Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruber later testified, "We found pyramids of jerrycans, each holding 5 gallons, stacked 10 feet high and stretching about 650 feet. The Americans hadn't even tried to destroy them. The captured fuel was high-octane aviation gasoline blended with motor fuel 80 octane or higher. German vehicles, especially the temperamental Maybach engines in Tiger tanks, were designed for 74-octane synthetic fuel. The American gasoline was actually too rich, causing engine knock and misfires in several German machines. As Peiper's men refueled, more revelations emerged. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann rummaged through the depot office and found shipping manifests. He could read English, thanks to his pre-war experience in his father's import business. The papers traced the fuel's journey, from Texas oil fields to New York harbors, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, over the Channel to Normandy, then trucked 400 miles to Honsfeld, a 6,000-mile odyssey completed in less than 6 weeks. I showed the papers to Obersturmbannführer Peiper, Hoffmann recalled in a 1976 interview. He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what this meant. Private Ernst Kara unearthed a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15, just 2 days old. The headline celebrated the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. A single pipeline carried more fuel daily than Kampfgruppe Peiper would use in the entire offensive. To grasp Peiper's shock, one must understand Germany's fuel situation by late 1944. Since May, Allied bombing had slashed synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft for lack of aviation fuel, cutting pilot training from 250 flight hours to a mere 60. The German Navy's surface fleet had effectively ceased operations. U-boats were fitted with snorkels to conserve diesel by running longer on batteries. On the home front, German civilians hadn't seen private car traffic since 1942. Gasoline was so precious that the Gestapo investigated black market thefts of individual litres. Farmers reverted to horse-drawn ploughs. Meanwhile, the United States was producing 67% of the world's oil. The East Texas oil field alone outproduced all of German-occupied Europe. American refineries ran at full tilt, so much so that Standard Oil was experimenting with petroleum byproducts simply because they had excess crude, a concept that would have seemed fantastical in fuel-starved Germany, where every drop was guarded like gold. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Honsfeld, Peiper's column surged forward. They reached Bullingen by noon on December 17, seizing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and most crucially, maps pinpointing other American fuel depots in the area. But those maps revealed a chilling truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles everywhere. Every major crossroads boasted a depot. The U.S. First Army alone held 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Peiper pressed on to Ligneuville, where his forces committed the Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners in a frozen field. Even this war crime was tied to fuel desperation. Peiper later claimed he couldn't spare gasoline to transport captives. By evening on, December 17, Peiper's spearhead reached Stavelot, site of a major American fuel depot containing over 2 million gallons, enough to guarantee reaching the Meuse. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already at work. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received warning of the German advance. His orders were stark: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. The Stavelot depot sprawled across 15 acres, stacked with 2.189 million gallons of gasoline in jerry cans. At 4:30 p.m., on December 17, as Peiper's vanguard neared, Brewster gave the command. Engineers poured gasoline trails between the stacks. White phosphorus grenades were distributed. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade. The explosion was instant and tremendous, he recalled. A wall of fire shot up about 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. Peiper's lead tanks arrived to find a pillar of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The blaze raged for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Unteroffizier Weber described the scene. The Obersturmbannführer stood on his tank turret watching the flames. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he climbed down and told me, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny them to us. What are we doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers replicated this scorched earth tactic, destroying fuel dumps rather than risking capture. At Thieux, 1.1 million gallons went up in flames. At Spa, 2.5 million gallons were torched. In total, The Americans deliberately incinerated over 8 million gallons during the first week, more than Germany had allocated for the entire operation. This casual ability to obliterate millions of gallons stemmed from a supply system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express, with its 6,000 trucks operating around the clock, delivered 412,000 tons of supplies, including vast fuel hauls. Each truck consumed 40 gallons daily, yet the operation itself burned more fuel than German Army Group B received monthly. By December 1944, the motor transport service employed 230 truck companies running color-coded routes. The system delivered 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for the First Army, recorded on December 18. Fuel receipts yesterday, 1.847 million gallons. Fuel issued, 1.623 million gallons. Net gain to reserves, 224,000 gallons. The pipeline system was even more impressive. Operation Pluto had laid pipes across the English Channel, pumping 1 million gallons daily from Britain. A network of pipelines extended inland. The Cherbourg-Paris line delivered 800,000 gallons daily. The Seine line moved 650,000 gallons. By December 1944, Allied forces in northwest Europe were consuming 7.5 million gallons daily, while receiving 8.2 million gallons building reserves even during offensive operations. As Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18, the impossibility of the German position became starkly clear. At Schur, they captured another depot, 5,000 gallons consumed in 3 hours of combat. Tiger tanks burned 2.5 gallons per mile in battle. Panthers consumed 1.5 gallons per mile. In the rugged Ardennes terrain, consumption spiked by 40%. Hauptmann Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, "By noon, on December 18, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit." The Americans, monitoring German radio traffic through ultra-intercepts, knew Peiper's fuel plight intimately. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units, enemy critically short of fuel, destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. That same day, American C-47 seconds flew 316 sorties delivering supplies to Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of fuel, more than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed. By December 19, as Peiper's forces engaged defenders at Stoumont, the fuel crisis had reached a breaking point. Tanks were being abandoned not from battle damage, but from empty fuel tanks, a heartbreaking sight for crews who had nurtured these steel giants through hell. Peiper consolidated his remaining fuel, perhaps 8,000 gallons enough for one engagement or a retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were gearing up for January operations. Brigadier General Maurice Gilland requested 245 million gallons for the coming month. The request was approved without discussion. The contrast went beyond quantity. American vehicles were standardized for efficiency. Sherman tanks sipped 0.8 gallons per mile compared to Tiger's 2.5. American trucks got 8 miles per gallon when fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, maintenance streamlined. German forces juggled a chaotic mix of captured and manufactured vehicles with mismatched needs. French tanks required different oil than German Panthers. Soviet trucks needed parts unlike German Opels. Each mismatch multiplied logistical headaches like a relentless nightmare. On December 20, Peiper received a radio message. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue with available resources. He summoned his commanders. Sturmbannführer Werner Poetschke was blunt. We have fuel for perhaps 12 miles. The Meuse is 18 miles away. According to Gruber's testimony, Peiper said, "Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we captured at Honsfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." This realization spread like wildfire. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, When I learned the Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons rather than risk our capturing it, I knew the offensive had failed before it began. Hitler, informed on December 28, refused to face reality. Speer noted, Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda. When shown photographs of burning Stavelot, he claimed it was Hollywood effects, but the lower ranks understood the truth. News spread faster than censors could suppress it. Feldwebel Ernst Müller wrote to his wife, Americans wash clothes in gasoline. They feed chocolate to dogs. They fire artillery for Christmas. We cannot fight infinity. The psychological toll undermined Nazi narratives of racial superiority. How could decadent Americans possess such wealth while the master race scraped for necessities? At the Nuremberg trials, German leaders repeatedly cited logistics, especially fuel, as the decisive factor. Field Marshal Keitel testified, "We had operational superiority from 1,940 to 1,941. By 1944, we couldn't move forces for lack of fuel, while Americans shifted armies like chess pieces." Peiper, tried for the Malmedy massacre, offered telling testimony, "Every decision after December 17 was shaped by fuel shortage. We couldn't maneuver, pursue, or retreat effectively. Americans moved freely while we counted liters." General Heinz Guderian wrote, "When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, everything to him but nothing to the Americans, the war was over." This story resonates because it marks the end of industrial warfare's evolution. Victories were forged in factories and refineries, not on fields of valor. The romantic ideal of war died in the Ardennes amid empty fuel tanks. Dr. Richard Overy calculated that by 1944, Allied to Axis production ratios exceeded 5-1 in major categories. In petroleum, it neared 50-1. These advantages couldn't be overcome by superior training or tactics. America produced 324,750 aircraft during the war, while Germany managed 119,907. The US built 88,410 tanks. Germany, 46,857. But most strikingly, America refined 1.8 billion barrels of oil in 1944 alone, while Germany scraped together 33 million barrels. On the 24th of December 1944, as Peiper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles, the magnitude crystallized. They had celebrated 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld as a miracle, only to learn it was meaningless to an enemy who could burn millions. Unteroffizier Karl Wortmann reflected in 1975. That morning at Honsfeld, finding American fuel, we cheered like we'd won the lottery. By evening, learning about Stavelot burning, we understood we'd already lost. The Americans had so much they could destroy what we'd die to possess. Those 50,000 gallons were less than a single American armored division consumed in 2 days, less than the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours, a mere rounding error in Allied daily intake. Major General Joseph Collins later wrote, "The Germans' desperate attempts to capture fuel exposed their miscalculation. They assumed we valued fuel as they did, as irreplaceable. They couldn't comprehend we had so much we could burn millions rather than risk a tactical disadvantage." Operation Wacht am Rhein failed through the immutable mathematics of industrial war. The offensive consumed approximately 2.8 million gallons, 40% of the total allocation, with the difference made up by captured supplies. During the same period, Americans consumed 267 million gallons, nearly 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft, but the deepest wound was the shattering of illusions. Every German who witnessed American abundance understood they weren't just fighting a war, they were participating in their own execution. Peiper survived, imprisoned until 1956 for war crimes. On the 14th of July, 1976, he was murdered at his French home by unknown assailants. But in 1967, he told historian Henry Liddell, "Finding that depot was the worst thing. If we'd run out earlier, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered the impossible. The lesson extends beyond World War II. In industrial warfare, logistics trumps tactics, production overwhelms courage, abundance defeats dedication. The German soldier of 1944 was arguably better trained and more experienced, but it didn't matter. Americans were backed by an industrial machine that could waste more than Germany could produce. This truth was encoded in every jerrycan at Honsfeld, every gallon burned at Stavelot, every pipeline stretching across France. Wars between industrial powers would be won by factories and refineries, not brilliant generals. Colonel Trevor Dupuy calculated that in December 1944, each American soldier was supported by 67 pounds of supplies daily, while each German received 3 pounds. Americans complained about waste. Germans would have considered American waste unimaginable abundance. In 1984, 40 years after the battle, veterans gathered at La Glaise. The museum displays Peiper's Tiger tank, still positioned where it ran out of fuel, a monument to defeat. Visitors ask why such powerful machines were abandoned. The answer, simple yet haunting: no fuel. This story, for those who've heard the echoes of war or passed down its tales, reminds us that true strength lies in preparation and production, not just bravery. If you have thoughts or memories about those days, share them below. We learn from history to avoid repeating its mistakes. If you found this story meaningful, please like and subscribe to explore more inspiring lessons from the past.